You're here because you want to get smart, fast on something important without getting bogged down. And that's what we do here at the Deep Dive.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're tackling a really foundational piece of work, the white paper, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system by Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious founder.
Right, the pseudonym. And this paper, it dropped back in 2008, and it wasn't just like a tech proposal. It was a totally radical rethink of how online money could work.
Okay.
So our mission today really is to cut through some of the jargon, understand the core problem Bitcoin was aiming at, and the, frankly, ingenious way it solved it. There are some really key, maybe surprising insights.
Okay, let's dive right in then. The paper starts by hitting on a pretty major friction point with online payments back then, and honestly still now in many ways.
Yeah.
Our reliance on trusted third parties, banks, credit card companies, PayPal, the usual suspects.
Exactly. The paper argues, we're used to the system, but it's built on trust, and that trust, it actually introduces some inherent weaknesses. Well, think about it. Can you really have a truly non-reversible online payment in that system?
Probably not. There's always chargebacks, disputes.
Right. There's always a middleman who can step in, mediate, maybe even reverse the whole thing. So, truly final settlement, not really there.
And that mediation, that middleman, the paper says it comes with costs.
Definitely. Fees, for one.
Yeah.
Which can make those small, sort of casual online transactions less practical,
Yeah, buying a coffee online with a huge fee wouldn't work.
Exactly. But it's bigger than just fees. It limits what you can do. Like, how do you have truly final, non-reversible payments for things that are non-reversible? Like a digital download or a service already rendered.
Yeah, you can't undownload something easily.
Precisely. And because reversals are possible, this need for trust just spreads everywhere. Merchants get wary. They have to guard against fraud constantly.
So they build in costs for that fraud verification.
Yeah, they just accept a certain percentage of fraud as like the cost of doing business. It's baked in.
It really is such a contrast to just handing someone cash, isn't it?
Oh, totally. Physical cash, that exchange is done. Final, no third party needed.
And the paper really zeroes in on the lack of a good peer-to-peer digital equivalent. That's the core problem it identified.
And that sets up the central aim. Design an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof, not trust.
Cryptographic proof. Like math.
Essentially, yeah, math instead of middlemen. Enabling people to transact directly, peer-to-peer, cutting out those intermediaries.
Okay, so how does it actually do that? How do you go from trust to proof? What's the mechanism?
Well, the paper introduces this concept of an electronic coin basically being a chain of digital signatures.
A chain of signatures.
Yeah, imagine like a digital file represents the coin. When I want to send it to you, I digitally sign a hash.
A hash being like a unique fingerprint of the transaction data.
Exactly. A fingerprint of the previous transaction and your public key, your digital address. And I just add this signed piece of info to the end of the coin's history.
So each time it changes hands, a new signed link gets added to this chain.
You got it. It creates this transparent, verifiable history of ownership. Anyone who gets the coin can look back through the whole chain of signatures.
Okay, that makes sense for tracking ownership.
Uh-huh.
But here's the big one, right? How do you stop me from spending that same digital coin twice, sending it to you, and then quickly sending the same coin to someone else before anyone notices?
Ah, yes. The double spending problem. That's the absolute crux of it for any digital cash system.
And normally a bank just keeps a central ledger, right? They know the coin's already gone.
Exactly. A central authority, like a mint or a bank, is the obvious fix. But the paper says, hang on, that brings back all the problems we're trying to avoid.
Right, a single point of failure, control, every transaction has to go through them again, back to square one.
Precisely. So the challenge Satoshi faced was, how can the recipient be sure the sender hasn't already spent that coin somewhere else without asking a central authority?
Okay.
The proposed solution is radical. To do this without trust, all transactions have to be publicly announced, broadcast to the whole network.
Publicly. Whoa, doesn't that destroy privacy? Everyone sees everything.
That's a really important question, and we'll definitely circle back to privacy. But the immediate hurdle is, if everything's public, how do we all agree on the order? If you send a coin to me and also try to send it to someone else at the same time, which one counts?
Ah, right. We need a single agreed-upon history.
Exactly. The recipient needs proof, verifiable proof, that the whole network, or at least the vast majority, agrees that this specific transaction was the first valid use of that coin.
Okay. So how does a scattered network agree on history? This sounds like where the timestamp server comes in.
You nailed it. The timestamp server. Now, that might sound technical, but the basic idea, as the paper explains it, is pretty simple. Traditionally, a timestamp server takes some data.
Like a batch of documents.
Yeah, or in this case, transactions. It hashes them, creates that unique fingerprint, and then publicly posts that hash, maybe in a newspaper or online. It proves that data existed at that specific time.
Like a digital notary almost. Verifiable proof of existence on a certain date.
Kind of, yeah. But what's really clever here is how Bitcoin adapts this. It's not a central server. It's a distributed peer-to-peer timestamp server.
Okay, distributed, meaning lots of people are doing it.
Exactly. And here's the magic. Each new timestamp, representing a block of recent transactions, doesn't just hash those transactions. It also includes the hash of the previous timestamp, the previous block.
Ah, so it creates a chain. Each new block explicitly refers back to the last one.
Precisely. It forms this chain where each new link cryptographically locks in and reinforces all the previous links. It becomes this increasingly tamper-proof historical record. Like building a tower, each new level rests securely on the one below it.
Okay, I see the chain. Very cool. But just having a chain doesn't stop someone from trying to rewrite an earlier part of the chain, does it? Or maybe creating a competing chain where they double spent their money.
You are absolutely right. That's the gap. And this is where the real, core innovation kicks in. Proof of work.
The famous proof of work, okay.
To make this distributed timestamp server work, to make that chain secure against tampering, the paper borrows an idea from Adam Back's Hashcash system. It says, okay, you can't just announce a new block and its hash. You have to work for it. You have to perform a certain amount of computational work to earn the right to add the next block to the chain.
Work.
Yeah.
Computational work. Okay, break that down. What does that actually mean in practice? What are people doing?
Right. So think of it as solving a specific kind of computational puzzle. The participants, we call them miners, they're essentially searching for a special number called a nonce.
A nonce? Okay.
And this nonce, when you combine it with the data in the block, they want to add all the transactions, the hash of the previous block, etc. And you run it all through a specific cryptographic hash function, like SHA-256.
The fingerprinting algorithm.
Exactly. The resulting hash, that output fingerprint, has to meet a very specific condition. It needs to start with a certain number of 0 bits.
0 bits, like the digital code has to start 00000.
Exactly like that. And the more leading zeros required by the network rules at that time, the harder it is, statistically, to find a nonce that produces such a hash.
So it's like rolling a giant many-sided die over and over, hoping to land on a very specific set of numbers. You're just trying random nonces until one happens to work.
That's a great analogy. You're essentially guessing nonces very, very quickly, hashing the block with each guess until bingo. You find one that generates a hash with the required leading zeros.
And that takes a lot of computer power.
A lot. That's the work. And this is crucial once someone finds a valid nonce and broadcasts the block. Anyone else can verify it almost instantly. They just take the block data, the proposed nonce, run the SHA-256 hash once, and see if it starts with the right number of zeros. Hard to produce, easy to verify.
Okay. Hard to produce, easy to verify. I get that. But connect it back for me. How does this difficult puzzle stop the double spending? What's the link?
Right. Because once a miner expends all that significant computational effort to find a valid nonce and get their block accepted onto the chain, that block containing those transactions becomes incredibly difficult to change. Why? Because it's now part of that chain, secured by its own proof of work, and linked to by the next block, which has its proof of work, and so on.
Well, so to change a transaction in an old block, you wouldn't just have to redo the puzzle for that block.
Nope. You'd have to redo the puzzle for that block, A and D, for every single block that came after it, all the way to the present. You'd have to essentially recreate the entire subsequent chain faster than the rest of the network is building the honest one.
And as the chain gets longer, that becomes practically impossible. The amount of work needed is just astronomical.
Exactly. Astronomically prohibitive. It's like trying to rewrite history when everyone else is continuously writing the next chapter. The energy cost would be immense.
Wow. Okay. That's clever. So the work secures the past.
It does. But proof of work also plays another vital role. Consensus. In a decentralized system, how do you decide whose version of history is the right one? How do you prevent someone just creating loads of fake identities, like Sybil attacks?
Yeah, the paper mentions that. If it was just like one IP address, one vote, Someone could easily fake tons of votes.
Totally gameable. So proof of work acts like a different kind of voting. One CPU, one vote, or more accurately, one unit of processing power, one vote.
Okay.
The chain of blocks that has the most cumulative proof of work invested in it, essentially, the longest chain, because length implies work over time that's considered the valid, authoritative history by everyone.
So the majority decision is expressed through computational power dedicated to extending a particular version of the chain.
You got it. If the majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will, on average, grow faster and outpace any attacker's chain. Satoshi turned what looks like wasted computation into the very mechanism that creates trust and security.
That is clever. And the paper also mentioned the difficulty adjusts.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't stay the same.
Right, good point. It's not fixed. The difficulty of finding that nonce, the number of leading zeros required, automatically adjusts roughly every 2 weeks. The network targets an average time for new blocks about 10 minutes. If blocks are coming faster than that,
Difficulty goes up.
exactly. If they're coming slower,
Difficulty goes down, keeps it stable.
keeps it humming along.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have the core ideas, the chain of signatures, the public ledger, the proof of work, let's walk through the actual steps. How does a transaction flow through this network? The paper lays out 6 key steps.
Okay, step by step. How does my Bitcoin get from me to my friend on this network?
All right, step 1. You create the transaction on your wallet saying, send X Bitcoin to friend's address, and you broadcast it out to the network nodes you're connected to.
Just broadcast it out there.
Yep. Step 2. Nodes, especially mining nodes, collect all these new, unconfirmed transactions they hear about. They bundle them into a candidate block.
Like gathering mail for the next delivery truck.
Good analogy. Step 3. Now, those miners start the hard part. They work on finding the proof of work, that nonce, for their candidate block full of transactions. It's a race.
So multiple miners are working on blocks containing potentially slightly different sets of transactions, all trying to solve the puzzle first.
Exactly. Step 4. Eventually, one miner finds a valid nonce. They immediately broadcast their completed block, proof of work included, to all their peers.
Eureka. I found it.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Step 5. The other nodes hear about this new block. They quickly check it. Are the transactions valid? Does the proof of work check out? Is it building on the longest chain they know? If yes,
Yeah, accept it.
they accept it. They add it to their copy of the blockchain.
And the crucial final step. Step 6. How does the network solidify this agreement?
Step 6 is how they signal acceptance and move on. They immediately start working on the next block, and crucially, they use the hash of the block they just accepted as the previous hash in their new candidate block.
So by building on top of the new block, they implicitly vote for it and extend that chain.
Perfectly put. That's how the chain grows, block by block, with consensus emerging from this process.
And the paper says the longest chain always wins, right?
Yeah.
What if 2 miners find a block at almost the same time? You get a temporary fork.
Yeah, temporary forks can happen. 2 competing blocks might get broadcast, but pretty quickly, one of those chains will get the next block added to it first. That chain becomes longer.
And nodes following the shorter chain will see the longer one emerge.
Realize it has more proof of work, abandon their shorter chain, and switch to building on the longer, now accepted one. The network naturally converges back to a single chain.
Makes sense. And transactions don't need to reach every node instantly.
No, not necessarily. As long as they propagate reasonably well, they'll likely get picked up in a block. And if a node misses a block broadcast, it can usually request it from peers later when it sees the next block appear. The system's pretty robust.
Okay, this paints a really clear picture of how it works, but why would anyone bother running these nodes, doing all this computationally expensive proof-of-work mining? What's the incentive?
Oh, yes, incentives. Absolutely critical. The paper outlines 2 main ones. First, the block reward.
The new Bitcoin.
Exactly. By convention, the very first transaction in every new block is a special coin-based transaction. It creates a fixed amount of brand new Bitcoin out of thin air, payable to the miner who found the block.
So finding a block means you get paid in new Bitcoin. That's a powerful incentive.
Hugely powerful. It serves 2 purposes. It rewards miners for securing the network, and it's the mechanism for distributing the initial supply of Bitcoin into the ecosystem. No central bank needed. It's like digital gold mining, as the paper suggests, expending resources, computational electricity to get new currency units.
Okay, block reward. What's the second incentive?
Transaction fees. When you send a transaction, you can optionally include a small fee. This fee is essentially the difference between the total Bitcoin value going into the transaction inputs and the total value going out in the outputs.
Like leaving a tip for the miner.
Exactly. The miner who includes your transaction in their winning block gets to claim that fee, and the paper anticipates that as the block reward diminishes over time, it halves periodically according to the protocol rules. These transaction fees will eventually become the primary incentive for miners.
Right. And the paper argues these incentives actually push people towards honesty.
Yeah, it makes a key point.
Yeah.
If you had enough computing power to potentially disrupt the network, say, to try and double spend,
Yeah.
you'd probably make more money in the long run just using that power to mine honestly, collect the block rewards and fees, and support the network whose coins you're accumulating. Attacking the system could devalue the very coins you hold or hope to gain. It aligns economic incentives with network security.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk efficiency and scale. This blockchain, this ledger of every transaction ever, doesn't it get enormous? Impractically huge to store.
That's a valid concern the paper addresses. It explains that once transactions are buried deep enough under many subsequent blocks, making them essentially irreversible, the full transaction data doesn't necessarily need to be kept by every single node forever.
Oh, how does that work?
Through something called Merkle trees. It's a way of hashing the transactions within a block so that you end up with a single root hash that summarizes all of them. This root hash is stored permanently in the block header.
Okay.
Later, you can prove a specific transaction was in that block by just showing its path, its Merkle branch, up to that root hash without needing all the other transactions from that block.
So you can prune the old transaction data, keeping only the block headers and these Merkle roots, and still verify everything.
Pretty much, yeah. It allows for significant disk space saving for nodes that don't need the full history. The paper estimated that even with growth, storing just the block headers would remain manageable, especially with improving storage tech.
And there's also that simplified payment verification, SPV, for users who aren't running full nodes.
Right. SPV, that's for lightweight clients, like maybe a wallet on your phone. They don't download the whole blockchain. They just download the chain of block headers, which is much smaller.
Okay.
Then, to verify a payment made to them, they get the block header for the block containing their transaction and the Merkle branch connecting their transaction to the Merkle root in that header.
So they can confirm their transaction is included in a block that's part of the longest, most work-intensive chain without needing all the other transactions.
Yeah, exactly. It relies on the assumption that the longest chain is honest, but it's a very efficient way to verify payments. The paper does note it's not quite as secure as running a full node, as you could theoretically be fooled by an attacker with immense hashing power, but it's generally considered secure enough for most uses.
Got it. What about handling value? Can you only send whole Bitcoins? And let's circle back to privacy.
Good questions. On value, transactions are flexible. They can have multiple inputs, meaning you can combine funds from several previous transactions you received.
Like gathering various bills and coins from your wallet to pay for something.
Exactly. And they can have multiple outputs. So you can pay someone and also send the change back to a new address you control, all in one transaction.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Now, privacy. Everything's public, but you said it's pseudonymous.
Right. The transactions are public on the blockchain, yes, but they're linked to Bitcoin, addresses those public keys not directly to real-world identities. So it's like seeing trades on a stock market ticker, and you see the price and volume, but not who bought or sold.
So a degree of privacy, but not true anonymity.
Correct. And the paper actually recommends, for better privacy, using a brand new Bitcoin address for every single transaction you receive,
Why is that?
to make it harder to link different transactions together as belonging to the same person. If you keep reusing the same address, anyone watching the blockchain can easily see all the payments going in and out of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Though the paper admits that if you combine multiple inputs in one transaction, that does reveal they likely belong to the same owner, right?
Yes, that's an inherent linkage that
Yeah.
can happen. Privacy in Bitcoin is complex, and it's not absolute.
Okay. Finally, the paper talks about calculations, probabilities,
Hmm.
basically proving it's really hard to break the system.
Yeah, it delves into the math behind the security model. It stresses that even a powerful attacker who somehow managed to build an alternative chain faster for a while, they can't just create Bitcoin out of nowhere or steal coins sent to someone else.
Why not?
Because the rules are enforced by all the nodes. Honest nodes will simply reject blocks containing invalid transactions that violate the protocol, like trying to spend coins you don't own, or creating coins outside the block reward.
So the main risk isn't theft, but rather an attacker reversing their own recent payments, the double spend.
Exactly. That's the primary attack vector the calculations address. Trying to spend coins, get goods or services, and then secretly build a longer chain where that spending transaction never happened, effectively getting their money back.
And the paper models this race between the honest chain and the attacker's chain.
Yes, using probability theory. It models it as a binomial random walk, which is related to the gambler's ruin problem.
Gambler's ruin.
Yeah, imagine a gambler with a finite amount of cash playing against the house, which has effectively infinite cash. Even if the odds are slightly in the house's favor, the gambler's chance of eventually going broke approaches 100%. Here, the attacker is the gambler with less hashing power, finite cash, and the honest network is the house.
So the attacker's likely to go broke, fall behind eventually.
Precisely. The paper provides a formula showing the probability of an attacker who controls a certain fraction of the network's power successfully catching up and overwriting a transaction that's already n blocks deep in the honest chain.
And what's the takeaway from that formula?
The key takeaway is that this probability drops exponentially as n, the number of confirmations, blocks added after the transaction, increases.
Exponentially, so very, very fast.
Extremely fast. The paper gives examples. Even if an attacker had, say, 30% of the network power, the chance of them reversing a transaction after 6 confirmations is already incredibly small, less than 1%. With only 10% power, it's virtually 0 after 6 blocks.
Wow, so that's why people talk about waiting for confirmations, usually 6.
Exactly that. The white paper essentially establishes this concept. Wait for a certain number of blocks to be added after your transaction, and you gain extremely high confidence that it's irreversible and safe from double spending. 6 confirmations became a common rule of thumb based on these kinds of probabilities.
Okay, let's try and wrap this deep dive up then. We've gone through the Bitcoin white paper, starting with the problem it saw. Online payments needing trusted middlemen.
Right, with all the costs and limitations that brings.
And it proposed this radical solution, a peer-to-peer system. Electronic cash using digital signatures chained together.
But the core problem was double spending without a central authority.
Which led to the really ingenious parts. The public ledger, the distributed timestamp server.
And crucially, proof of work. Using computational power as the basis for security and consensus, making the history incredibly hard to rewrite.
Replacing trust in institutions with trust in computation and cryptography, it really was a fundamental shift.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is how it uses these sort of known cryptographic building blocks and game theory incentives to create this robust, decentralized system. That core idea, using computational work plus a public ledger to get consensus and security without a central point of control, that was the paradigm shift.
So, as a final thought for everyone listening, consider how this foundational concept, this idea of decentralized, trustless systems that came out of this 2008 paper about digital cash, how has it already started to ripple outwards?
Yeah, beyond just currency. What other areas, what other problems that rely on intermediaries or trust might be changed or solved using similar kinds of approaches? Blockchain technology, distributed ledgers, the influence is undeniable.
That's definitely something to think about. Where else could this apply?
And if this sparked your interest, we really do encourage you to check out the original white paper. It's surprisingly readable. We'll link it in the show notes, along with some of the prior work it references. Going to the source is always worthwhile.